Thank you very much for joining us today. It's a true pleasure to be meeting you all. Some familiar faces there, but also lots of new folks. And it's a true pleasure to be running this session today as part of Advocacy Awareness Week and the National Advocacy Conference. A huge thank you to Kate and to Gail, who've been very supportive in helping us set this up. My name is Tanya Hamid, and I'm an associate of social finance. I'm joined by my colleague Fergus Hamilton, who will be running the session with me. At Social Finance, we are a social impact consultancy, so we partner with government and charities around a range of social issues, both in the UK as well as internationally. And as I said, to work on lots of different things, but one of the key things we're working on at the moment is looking at the role of advocacy, particularly when it comes to supporting people with learning disabilities and autistic people. In this program, we act as a learning and evaluation partner, and we'll talk a bit more about that role in just a second. It is a 3-year program, so we're about halfway through, and there's still a lot more to come. But we feel that we're at a good stage now, and today we'd really love to share some of our emerging findings with yourselves, who are the true experts in this field, of course, and to really gather your perspectives and your ideas on what we could be doing better, how we can take this forward, and to together really explore the wider opportunities and challenges in this space. And so most of all, we're really keen to engage with you, your experiences, and of course, we'd really love to collaborate with you going forward. So really looking forward to discussing that later today and hearing your ideas on all of that. But before we start, it would be really fantastic for us to learn a bit more about you. So do please feel free to add your name and organization in the chat. In addition, I'll also run a couple of quick Slido polls just to understand who's in the room. So Ferg, if you could perhaps drop great, there we go. So in the chat, you will find a link to Slido. It'd be great if people could just click through. You will see a poll there asking the nature of your involvement in this space. So it'd be fantastic for us to see where people are joining us from and what role they play in this space. Would it be possible to share your screen, Ferg? There we go. I think we can see some results coming in already. So we see 78% people are advocates. Some people who are researchers and learners, learning partners, including ourselves. Some folks who are in the other category, would love to hear what that is. We have some funders with us as well. Interested to hear if you have any experts by experience or commissioners with us as well. Great. So it looks like it's a majority of advocates, which is what we had expected. And that's brilliant for us because you're the true experts here, and we're very keen to hear from you and to learn from you. So thank you very much for making the time. I'll just move on to the next poll that we have for you, which is around what does advocacy mean to you? So you'll now see that question on your screen. It'd be fantastic if you could describe maybe in a word or two, or maybe a very short sentence, how you view advocacy and what it means to you. And the results will start appearing on the screen shortly. Someone said empower, rights, supporting a person to uphold rights, voice, living our best life, people having a voice, inclusion, being heard, equality, uplift, involved in decisions, challenging, treating fairly, not doing it alone, amplifying, being the voice of advocacy partners, affirmation, listening. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for engaging with that, everyone. I think that's really encouraging to hear. It looks like there's lots of consensus there. And as you will see later on today as we present, I think that chimes really well with what we've been hearing in our experience in our work as well. So with that, I will quickly share an agenda and some of our introductory thoughts before we move into the presentation itself. So we're hoping to share 5 key things today, or to look into 5 key things. So we'll start off with a quick introduction to the program that we're part of, which is the Henry Smith program and the work that we're doing within that. We'll go through a quick overview of our research and learning approach, and then I'll hand it over to my colleague Ferg, who will take us through some emerging findings from our recent research. We'll also talk about some future research areas that we're interested in, and then we'll spend quite a bit of time in breakout room discussions. So it'll be fantastic for us to then test these findings with you, to hear any questions you have, to hear your reflections. In particular, we're very keen to hear if these resonate with your experience. We want to make sure things that we're gathering also resonate outside of the program that we're immediately part of. And this is where your thoughts would be really valuable. We'd also love to hear about any things you might be missing, anything that might have been surprising to you, and ways in which we can take this forward. So ways in which you think we can reach out to the wider sector, including yourselves, but also policymakers and funders who eventually we want to influence and try and put this evidence in front of. Just a couple of quick ground rules. It'd be fantastic if throughout the session people could keep themselves on mute, unless, of course, you're speaking. Please do raise your hand or use the chat to contribute. And then finally, do please turn your video on if you can. It is fantastic to see people's faces, if possible, but also completely understand if you'd rather not. Great. So with that, a quick introduction to the Henry Smith program, which we're part of. So as I said before, Social Finance is a social impact consultancy. And in this particular program, we are the learning and evaluation partner for a £2.6 million grant program. This program is funded by the Henry Smith Charity, who are one of the biggest grant makers in this country. And this is something we're doing in partnership with Speak Up, who are our lived experience partners. Through this program, we are supporting 15 grantees who are providing advocacy services to people with learning disabilities and or autistic people across the UK. So this includes England, Scotland, and Wales. And our role within this is to help build an evidence base around independent and non-statutory advocacy, to really try and demonstrate its impact better and to make the case for future sustainable funding. And so how we do this is that we gather insights and data from our grantees. We work very closely with them to learn more about the work that they do, the impact that this is having. We also promote learning in collaboration through a community of practice, which brings together all the grantees, our funders, which is the Henry Smith Charity, and Speak Up, our lived experience partners. And we also bring in an advisory board into the discussion, as well as other externals as and when appropriate. And together, we're working on building an evidence-based case that we can then take to policymakers and to funders to try and build that case for sustainable funding. In terms of the research and learning approach we've taken, it's quite a unique approach for us as well. And it tries to bring together what we feel is best for this piece of work and for this space. And when we started off, one of the key things we were told and learned was that there's a real lack of data, particularly quantitative data in this space, and that often holds back the space from really demonstrating the very valuable work that it is doing, the work that you yourselves are doing, especially in the eyes of commissioners and funders. And so keeping that in mind, we consulted very widely with all the grantees, with commissioners, with researchers, with other experts in this space, with experts by experience, and of course, our own partners in the program. And through that, we came up with an outcomes framework. So it's a fairly simple Excel-based tool, but we use this to gather data, particularly more quantitative data, such as things around demographic data, how people are achieving their goals, but also softer outcomes, so things such as process outcomes. And we gather this every 6 months, and we're using this very actively in all of our research and engagement work. The second thing we've done is put together a community of practice. We meet every quarter, and the purpose behind this is to sort of come together to delve deeper into specific issues that people are keen to discuss, but also to use this as a space for peer learning, to really share challenges, to look at best practice together, and to really learn from each other. Each year, we also undertake intensive phases of primary research. So that's sort of what we've currently just finished off. We've looked into some specific questions that I'll be coming to on the next slide. And that's sort of what our presentation today is based on. And throughout this time, we've tried to co-produce our work with Experts by Experience. So as I said, we collaborate very closely with Speak Up, who are our Experts by Experience partners. And so we involve them very closely when we are designing any of these intensive phases of research. At the very beginning, we make sure we're asking the right questions, we're asking them in the right way. During the work and during the research, we meet with them quite regularly. And then once we come up with some findings, we make sure we are checking those with Experts by Experience, ensuring that those resonate. And that we are capturing the necessary nuance and granularity when we represent them. And of course, very importantly, also we emphasize reaching out to people using these services, so the Experts by Experience who are benefiting from these services themselves, and making sure their perspectives are a part of our work, and indeed triangulate anything else we're learning from other sources. We also bring input from our advisory board, which is a set of experts from across academia, commissioning, practice, and other sectors. And then finally, we make sure that while we're trying to push the envelope, we're trying to really build the evidence in the space, try and make sure that we're balancing these research needs with capacity and accessibility. So besides this presentation of the work that we do within our program often is, for example, an easy read. We make sure all of our outputs have a detailed version as well as an easy read version. And we really try and balance all the sort of asks that we have of grantees with the capacity that they have, and really try and make sure we're not taking them away from the key work that they do in supporting people. With that, here's some of the key questions that we explored in this phase. These are informed by the data that we received from grantees, things that we heard were of interest to them, things that were of interest to our partners. And so together we came up with these 5 key questions. So the first one was around really trying to understand what independent and non-statutory advocacy services do. So really trying to explain this in detail, have the right examples and case studies to be able to demonstrate this. Secondly, understanding how these services differ from statutory advocacy and add value. Thirdly, looking at what people using these services need from advocacy. So what are the kind of areas or issues that they need support with? How do services work with people using these services? So really trying to understand what this looks like on a day-to-day basis, on a week-to-week basis, and again, having lots of great examples and case studies of how this works in practice. And then finally, also understanding what some areas of improvement might be. In terms of our methods, so we've sort of been using mixed methods research. We've made sure all of this is co-produced alongside our other partners. So this means using data from the outcomes framework we've set up, also running very detailed surveys, interviews, using the community of practice events that we convene, in particular, a recent one around race equity, as we're also really interested in exploring access and race equity and how these can potentially be improved upon. We sought feedback from our advisory group, made sure their feedback was incorporated in our outputs. We spoke to people using services and ran sessions to understand their perspectives. And then finally, we've translated our findings into a report and a presentation, which we are, of course, presenting to you today. There's more detailed, there's a detailed report available, which we'll be very happy to share with you all if of interest. We're also developing an easy read summary in case that's of interest as well. So please do reach out if you'd like to have access to any of those. And with that, I'll pass it over to my colleague Ferg to take us through some of the emerging findings. He'll go through these in the next 20 minutes or so, and then we will come to discussions in breakout rooms where we'd be really keen to hear from yourselves. But in the meantime, if you have any questions, please do pop them into the chat, and then we can stop after the presentation to take these. So with that, over to you, Ferg.
Thanks, Tanya, for that introduction, and hi to everybody on the call. Yeah, it's exciting to be able to present these findings more widely than the 15 grantees that we've been working with so far. But first of all, I think I'll take you through an executive summary or a brief kind of 4 quick headlines before we go into the details. The first thing we found was that grantees are giving people a voice and helping them to make their own decisions. And we have learned that giving people a voice can mean different things to different people, depending on their circumstances, their ability to communicate verbally, and their confidence. We found that a common theme in the interviews that we've conducted with grantees and with people who have been part of self-advocacy groups and who have used one-to-one advocacy services is that grantees aim to help people have the same agency over their lives as people who don't have learning disabilities and or autism. The second headline is that non-statutory services are offering support that is flexible to people's needs and preferences, that works across a wide range of issues and depends heavily on building trust with advocacy partners to help them work towards their goals, often in longer term relationships that can span different goals. The third headline is regarding the process outcomes that Tanya mentioned before. So far, the preliminary data looks rather positive. So the process outcomes have risen across all 7 metrics that we have been tracking. And this indicates that people are getting what they need from advocacy services. And the final headline is to do with the challenges around reaching certain communities, especially ethnic communities, that might benefit from advocacy. We have identified areas of good practice through our community of practice events, and we have also learned that there are significant challenges also regarding how funding and resourcing might help to overcome these challenges and fill other gaps. So what do independent and non-statutory advocacy services help people achieve? So first of all, from the data that we've gathered, it includes for each person a goal category, so we could kind of learn about the different goals that people are seeking help with. We've got 641 individual records so far, and the top 3 goals were the first one was accessing health services, social services, and other services. And we heard from interviews that we've conducted with people who are using these services that it's often very difficult. Well, it can be challenging for them with learning disabilities to be listened to by health services and social services in some circumstances, and it's only when advocates get involved that their issues begin to be taken seriously. The second goal is help with accommodation, and this can mean several different things. So some of the grantees that we work with deal specifically with parents in child protection and safeguarding circumstances or procedures, but also one-to-one advocacy sometimes deals with people who are looking for more independence from their accommodation, maybe moving into supported accommodation or moving out of supported accommodation. The third one was dealing with family issues. So this also relates to child protection issues. And the fourth one was understanding legal rights. So we heard that it's often the case that people are unaware sometimes of what should be happening in certain circumstances, and advocates can then speak to them, learn about their goals, and then tell them what should be happening, what they have a right to, and then a plan can be made to address or to put pressure on certain levers to get these rights upheld. The second thing is that we learned that support is tailored to the goals and preferences of individuals. And the outcomes it tries to achieve are entirely led by the wishes of the advocacy partners or members of a self-advocacy group. I think this is one of the unique things about non-statutory advocacy over other types of advocacy. We've also learned that goals tend to change over time, and that support is often long-term. Goals can change due to changes in someone's life circumstances or due to their evolving knowledge of what advocacy can do for them, and that their realization that it can help in other areas of their lives, that they have issues that are impacting on their quality of life and well-being. We also learn that additional goals can come out of trusting relationship between advocates and advocacy partners. As a relationship evolves, there may be more disclosure of issues. And we also learned through interviews that trust is a crucial part of non-statutory advocacy and indeed all advocacy, really. Some grantees described that their role as sort of a safety net. So after kind of the intensive part of support is over, or an outcome has been achieved or maybe not achieved, or it's been brought to the point where there is deemed no other recourse, people are often encouraged to come back to the service if new issues arise. And indeed, in the interviews we held with people who use the services and people who use self-advocacy groups, this was one of the things that they felt most reassured by, was that at any point in time they felt comfortable with coming back to the service to seek advice and help. Several grantees also operate a membership scheme, and this can be a way of keeping people in touch with what's going on at the service or in self-advocacy groups. So how do non-statutory advocacy fill gaps in the advocacy landscape? So a key question for us in this research was what the added value of non-statutory advocacy brings over statutory advocacy. And we so far have got the perspective of the non-statutory advocacy grantees that we have been working with through interviews and surveys. And they have identified a few key areas that they believe that they fill gaps. So the first is that their support is entirely issue-based. So that means that it's not determined by statutory legislation, but by the people who use services or use groups themselves. This allows grantees to more or less tackle any issue, providing they have the expertise to do so, helping them overcome barriers to independence, such as taking a bus pass or even assisting people with police complaints. Another aspect is that it is time unlimited, depending on how long the issue goes on for. That usually the support will stop when the individual receiving support decides that they want support to stop. So this allows them to form a bond with their advocate, and where there is a greater degree of flexibility. Grantees have told us that this sometimes isn't the case with statutory advocacy, which will end when the legal requirement ends. Third one is that it can be very person-centered. So advocates can build trust and understanding with people, allowing them to adapt to the needs of the individual using the service or the group, meaning that communication is extremely flexible, as well as meeting times, frequency of meetings, and the development of understanding is not always possible in this way for statutory advocacy, where sometimes advocates are brought in or drafted in at last minute due to a court order, and sometimes leading on to the next point, they're brought in from other places in the country due to high demand, and they're not always kind of plugged into the local service environment. Okay. So we've also learned that grantee organisations support different cohorts. So the majority actually of our grantees are one-to-one general issue-based supports provided to adults. However, Selection are also provide specialist support for families in child protection and safeguarding procedures, and also specialist support for children and young adults. Another key difference between non-statutory and statutory advocacy is non-statutory advocacy can also take the form of self-advocacy groups, where people can develop skills to speak up on issues that are important to them, And grantees have described how this may be serving a preventive role, as the fact that people learn these skills means that they are there is less demand on social services and other services, as they learn to kind of develop the skills to deal with issues on their own in the future, and then help others to do the same. So what does support look like in practice, and how do advocates help their advocacy partners? So through our outcomes framework, we were able to code some of the data given in the support given to help achieve goal box. Through this exercise, we were able to identify the top 4 types of support that are offered or provided by advocates. Our caveat here is that in many cases, individuals will receive a blend of all of, well, 1, 2, 3, or 4, or maybe more of these types of support. But the top 4 that we've identified are advocating with services and social workers. And what we mean by this is that they can facilitate, advocates can facilitate contact with services to improve access, where people have not been listened to in the past, and it is only when issues are escalated by the advocate sometimes that these issues are taken seriously. The second key element of support is explaining rights and helping people understand options. So this will involve interpreting the situation a person is in and explaining what should be happening in a way that people can understand, and then exploring options and creating a plan for what should happen next. The third one was which is a key one, which takes up a lot of resources for advocates. That is preparing for and going to meetings and hearings together with the advocacy partner. So this will involve helping individuals set clear objectives before key hearings and meetings, and then maybe accompanying them to the meeting and taking notes, and then playing back what happened to the individual later, especially when things move at quite a fast pace and there are lots of people and it's a pressurized environment. We've heard that it's quite difficult for people with learning disabilities and autistic people to absorb all of the information that is coming their direction in that time. So afterwards there will be a debriefing session, and then a new plan will be made, and this process will be iterated for the next meeting. And finally, the fourth most common was signposting to other services. So the fact that a lot of non-statutory advocacy services are quite small and place-based means that they have specialist knowledge and contacts in key areas with services. So this facilitates people accessing services. So we found that 3 in 10 people also recorded a secondary goal, and that some of these goals related to the first goal, while others were from a different category. And this speaks to the point that I made before, that people may come with an original goal, but then through the development of their relationship with an advocate, they may realize that the advocate can help them with other goals as well. In terms of engagements, this was very variable, and it depends entirely on the circumstances and where somebody is in their advocacy journey. So for example, around the time of important hearings, there will be an intense period of support, and then maybe a drop off in periods where there are not so many meetings. But what we found was that there was kind of a split between the different levels of engagement. So 4 of 10 people had 7 or more engagements with advocates along their advocacy journey. 2 out of 10 had one-off engagements, while 4 out of 10 had 2 to 6 engagements. So what about people who are actually using grantee services? So as Tanya mentioned before, the outcomes framework that we have developed allows for us to capture quite a detailed degree of demographic information, as well as other information about where referrals are coming from. So what we can see here is that for gender, there's quite an even split between the males and the females using grantee services. In terms of age, there is also a wide range. So we have some people over 80 using the services, but then we also have children as young as 5 to 9 using services too. The most common age, though, was the age bracket of 30 to 39 years old. And then moving on in terms of referrals, the most common source of referrals was self-referral, with around 4 in 10 people entering support this way. This is much higher than referrals from social workers and other sources. And I think this is an interesting point about non-statutory advocacy, is that the fact that it is very often a voluntary experience, I suppose, and people putting themselves forward, and this can be very empowering for them to seek out this advocacy support and then benefit from it that way. Non-statutory advocacy, in a certain way, is also voluntary, but it's more dictated by kind of demands of legislation. So which groups are proving harder for grantees to reach? So we also collected data on ethnicity of advocacy partners, and we have the analysis we've conducted has revealed that Asian ethnicities are underrepresented among our grantees, who are spread quite widely over the United Kingdom. And there are also access challenges related to other groups as well. So in terms of the data, nearly 90% of people receiving support were white British. The most common ethnicity was black ethnicity, with around 4%, and then around 3% of people were of Asian ethnicity. So what we thought might be useful is that we would compare this with the latest UK census data, and we found that Asian ethnicities are the highest ethnic minority in the UK, with around 7% of people, and from our grantees you can see it's 3%. So I think whether or not this translates more widely with your experiences, we'll be definitely very interested to hear that. We also know the caveat is that our grantees are not necessarily representative of the UK population as a whole. In terms of other underrepresented groups from our community of practice, we held one on race equity and interviews. We found that Roma and traveller groups can be often underserved by advocacy for certain reasons, as well as Eastern Europeans. There are, of course, a lot of other groups which are underrepresented as well, and we'll also be keen to hear what you think in the breakout rooms. So in terms of the challenges towards reaching some of these ethnic groups, our grantees have told us that some ethnic groups may be reluctant to seek support outside of the family. I think this may be down to a kind of belief that families should be self-supporting, and that learning disabilities are something that should be kept in-house, and maybe people living with their parents for longer as a norm. We also heard that there may be a mistrust of services, and also stigma towards learning disabilities and autism. There are also linguistic barriers that have prevented some advocacy groups that we've spoken to in diverse areas from accessing people who need support. The word advocacy also sometimes doesn't translate well in terms of outreach. We've heard anecdotal evidence that in Eastern European languages, advocacy often translates to propaganda, and so this is kind of a challenge which it's difficult to overcome when people don't have a very developed idea of what advocacy does, how it can help them. Advocacy groups are already starting at a bit of a lower footing because of this. Challenges for grantees reaching people, language skills. So we heard that advocates sometimes do not have the language skills to reach certain groups. There's also a lack of affordable translation services, and also challenges around having a translator as a partner in the advocacy partnership between the advocate and the advocacy partner, if you know what I mean. So we know that strong advocacy partnerships are based on trust, and when you have a translator in the middle, this can be a disadvantage. We've also heard that there are data gaps. So most local authorities have data on learning disabilities, and data on ethnicity. However, these data sets are often not joined up, so grantees find it a challenge to work out how many people from a certain ethnicity may be in need of advocacy. There was also mention of a lack of control over referrals. So it was seen that referrals from social services were only as inclusive as basically the social services were themselves. So if the social services weren't reaching these groups and they were providing a high degree of referrals, then by proxy, advocacy services will be receiving fewer referrals from underserved groups. In terms of good practice, we heard three key things. One was changes to recruitment processes to make them more inclusive. This would often include blind recruitment processes. It was seen as an advantage, especially in more ethnically diverse areas, to have an ethnically diverse staff base, because this would give advocates kind of an advantage knowing where to focus outreach, whether it be faith-based VCSEs or in other areas. In terms of outreach, events, posters, and stories intended to reach underrepresented groups were seen as beneficial. We heard examples of a group in London organising cricket matches and picnics in the park, and this kind of plays into the idea that word of mouth is the most powerful area to focus on in terms of outreach. Okay, and the other one was working with faith-based VCSEs and ethnic-based VCSEs. We heard some good examples of information and resource pooling between different groups. So moving on to the outcomes achieved so far. So did advocacy make a difference? So far, we only have, so the way that we've collected data is our process outcomes work. So we take a survey of how people feel across these 7 key metrics at the beginning of their support, and then how they feel at the end of the support. So that's the black bars there and the blue bars. So far, only a small number of people, 142, have completed support. However, the data we do have shows people registering improved scores across the board for all the areas that the outcome framework measures. Largest improvements were seen in knowing about local services and how to access them, and the feeling listened to categories. Hopefully in the future, we will have more data and be able to draw some more robust conclusions about the value add in this area in order to make a case to funders to sustainably fund these services. So what are some of the key areas where grantees see opportunities to expand or improve? So there were 6 key areas. So the first one was people with neurodegenerative physical conditions like Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis. They were seen to be a need in that area. There was also seen to be a need for students with SEN, especially those who are excluded from legal aid by means testing. We also have young people who are employed but lacking in essential skills like reading and writing. And then we have autistic people who lack social connections, and this group was seen to be quite difficult to reach because they're less likely to self-refer and less likely to know people who might raise their awareness of advocacy. Some other grantees highlighted a need for advocacy with older people in care homes. And there was also a recognition that, especially in rural areas, it was harder for advocates to reach people, especially when they come from traditional communities where there's still stigma around learning disabilities and autism. So what's next? So we have a year and a half left of this program. Next summer will be our next intensive phase of research. And by that point, we're hoping to have a much more robust base of the process outcomes. And from there, we'll be able to create a clear case for the value proposition of non-statutory advocacy and what the programme has achieved so far. Following that, we will be looking in 2025 to the lessons from the programme in terms of who advocacy works best for. And a key part of this will be we will look to put together a cost-benefit analysis to help make a convincing case for sustainable future funding from local authority commissioners and more broadly. Anyway, that's about it. So thanks for listening.
Great. Thank you so much, Ferg. That's super helpful. Before we go on to the discussion, I just want to pause and ask if there's any questions, any immediate reflections. We will have almost half an hour to go into depth and discuss with you in groups. But just if there's any immediate thoughts, do please feel free to raise your hand or to drop a question into the chat. I have a question in the chat from Victoria. Just wondering if you wanted to perhaps unmute and actually ask the question yourself, Victoria. Otherwise, I'm happy to read it out.
Hi, Tanya. Thanks. Brilliant slides, brilliant presentation, super useful. Thank you very much. Yeah, I was really interested, Ferg, in the last slide. Further work that agencies could be doing to reach excluded groups. And I just noted that, yeah, the kind of those that are pretty isolated and caring for family members wasn't included. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Am I on mute? Just checking. No, yeah, I think you're potentially that is a key area that we could look at that didn't come through in the interviews that we've done so far. Okay. A caveat to that would be that we didn't interview all of our grantees due to the constraints of the program and funding. So I think in future that's definitely something that we can look at. But I'm sure you're right that is also a key area that people are requiring advocacy and not receiving it.
Yeah. So just one quick request. I'd love to receive the materials from today. They're brilliant. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Victoria. And just to add to that, on the parents caring for children with disabilities, that is something that some of our the grantees that we're working with in this program are definitely focusing on. So they acknowledge that that's an area that's often perhaps not covered, and that's one of the reasons why they're trying to focus on that through the funding they receive through this program. But yes, the others didn't explicitly come through, but potentially, as Ferg said, because we didn't get to speak to everyone in as much detail. And yes, very happy to share the materials from today. As for the report, hopefully in the next few weeks, we will be able to publish it publicly and then share that as well. But very easy to share the slides from today more quickly. And I think that answers Hillary's question as well around expected publication date for the report. So it's pretty much ready. It's all sort of set to go. I think it's helpful for us to be having this session at this point as well. And we've been having a couple of other similar sessions and making sure that we're on the right track before we publish anything. So hopefully within the next month or so, we will be able to share it on our website and share it with yourselves as well. Kate, your question, when you say people who lack capacity, could you explain that a bit more? If you wanted to perhaps unmute. Right, so non-instructed advocacy, yes, absolutely. Ferg, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, so a few of our... There's some of the key challenges actually with collecting the data regarding these cases. But yeah, there are a few of, I think there's 2 or 3 of the grantees that specifically practice non-instructed advocacy. And yeah, I think it was obviously a challenge to collect data around these, especially with the process outcomes, because I think in practice, the nature of these cases is basically makes it quite a challenge to communicate things like that. But yeah, I'm not sure what else to say on it. but we did some of the grantees do deal with especially children who lack capacity.
Great. Any other quick questions before we go into our group discussions? Jacqueline, your comment definitely resonates, and I think that's something that we've heard a lot from our grantees, and that's indeed why this program that we're part of was started, to try and provide more resourcing to the non-statutory advocacy sector, but also try and build more evidence around it so that it can then receive more funding going forward. But yeah, definitely recognize that challenge, and that's exactly what we are trying to, in a small part, address. And Hilary, thank you very much for your email address there. We'll note that down and definitely be in touch. Great. So I think with that, we can perhaps go into our discussions. But before we do that, just quickly on what we will be discussing. So firstly, it would be just great for us to, well, get to know you. So we'll do a quick round of introductions when we go into the rooms. And then following that, it'd be great to hear any general thoughts from yourselves. Obviously, you've started hearing them a little bit through the chat already. It'd be great to hear if these findings resonate with you and your experience. Is there anything that surprised you? Secondly, it'd be great to hear any suggestions on how we can share these findings and collaborate further with the wider sector, including yourselves and policymakers. And then finally, it'd be great to look at wider opportunities and challenges in the advocacy sector. So anything that we haven't captured here that we might have missed, it'd be fantastic to hear your thoughts there. So with that, I think, Kate, you will be sorting us into two breakout groups. So Ferg will be facilitating one and I will be facilitating the other. We will have about 25 minutes and then we will return to the plenary at 1:45 when we will have a quick round of feedback and then the closing. Thank you very much, Kate. Brilliant. Well, welcome back, everyone. Thank you very much for sticking around and for all of your participation in the rooms. It'd be fantastic if people could just keep themselves on mute, if that's okay. So we're in the last 15 minutes of the session. It'd be fantastic to hear quickly what the first group discussed. So Ferg, if you wanted to give a quick summary, and of course people from Ferg's group will be chip in as well, and then I'll do the same. We'll do a final Slido poll after that and then close off with some final remarks. But over to you first, Ferg, if you want to quickly give an overview of your group.
Thanks, Tanya. Yeah, I'm going to attempt to do this, but if anyone in my group feels like adding anything as well, you're more than welcome. But in answer to the first topic that we spoke about findings and whether they resonated, in general, I think the findings did resonate with people. One point was that it had been noted by one of the members of my group that rural areas were particularly hard to reach, and they were happy to see that come through in the data that we have presented. There was a question about the time unlimited nature of support and whether that was actually feasible in terms of what the demand for advocacy is in a specific area. It was mentioned that I think there has to be some kind of limit to the time, because advocates have to go where the need is, and draw a line under some cases. But I think it's also the case that there was some interest in the way that self-advocacy groups can be used as kind of a maintenance level of advocacy once one-to-one advocacy had concluded or become less intense. There was also kind of agreement that larger advocacy organizations were pushing out smaller advocacy organizations in a lot of areas, and especially pushing smaller advocacy organizations into doing more statutory work, when they would sometimes also like to be doing non-statutory work. In terms of the best ways to share findings with people, I think we agreed that doing presentations at events like this very useful, because you get a broad cross section of people attending them. Also, there was a request that we could share the slides, or that the slides that we have shared could be used in team meetings once a month, because the numbers and the data that they contain may be quite dense, but also people in the team would be very interested in it. In terms of the wider opportunities and challenges, we spoke more about larger organizations taking over and the fact that they have a lot of resources to get their voice out and advocate for themselves over smaller organizations, and maybe they don't offer they're not able to offer the same kind of personalized support, that they seem quite formulaic in the way they operate, and that kind of goes against the principles of a lot of what good advocacy should look like. There was talk about that we need acknowledgement of how we can bring these findings to commissioners. There's a clear demand for more person-centered advocacy work, but it's a case of holding commissioners to account, and that's kind of an ongoing challenge in a complex funding environment. And I think that's all we got here.
Thank you so much, Ferg. Did anyone from Ferg's group want to add to that? Anything to clarify there? Great. Happy to give a quick summary from mine. I think some very similar themes. Firstly, great to hear that generally the findings seem to resonate with people, which is great for us to hear. It shows us that we're on the right track, which is always good. Someone noted that particularly the point around people's goals changing over time, especially as you start working with them and build that trust, really resonated. The value of community advocacy, that really resonated, as well as ongoing challenges around capacity, and sort of balancing working with people long term with having new people join and benefit from the service, which I believe Ferg's group also seems to have touched on. We also discussed the need to bring non-statutory advocacy's value out, so like really trying to demonstrate its impact, but also seeing it as an equal to statutory advocacy in some ways, and basically reiterating that both are, of course, really important in their own roles, might be doing slightly different things, but have complementary and important roles to play. We also discussed self-referrals. Again, this seemed to resonate with people as one of the most popular sources for referrals, shows that there's independence, people can really instruct on what they need, but at the same time, this can be challenging when trying to reach out to people who might not be in the position to actually self-refer. And this brought us to a discussion on, well, not just referrals, but also how advocacy should be doing more than just signposting at times and potentially making sure that it's as enabling as possible. So whether that means helping people develop the right skills or the right capacity to be able to take ownership of some of these aspects going forward. In terms of sharing with the wider sector, I had some really great recommendations from our group, particularly around reaching out to voluntary community umbrella organizations, reaching out to third sector frameworks, particularly for regions, who can then further lobby local authorities or local mayors. We were told that the Yorkshire Mayor, in particular, the West Yorkshire Mayor, Tracy, would be particularly interested in some of this. So that's really good for us to hear. And we'll look into that more, as well as reaching out to other mayors as well. Suggestions around linking advocacy outcomes to health outcomes, particularly through potentially integrated care boards. And finally, as always, of course, giving voices of people who are receiving advocacy its due importance and bringing that into these conversations. Not too much more on the challenges and opportunities side, but I think people just sort of echoed what we'd covered in terms of challenges around funding, lack of volunteers, training, lack of language skills, which could be helpful in interpretation, as well as furthering cultural understanding. And that also translates as an opportunity. Of course, greater diversity amongst advocates or advocacy organizations could lead to making advocacy as relevant as possible, as helpful as possible for a range of communities, particularly minority groups. And then finally, agreement from some that a national body for independent advocates could be helpful, particularly if it can support on training and funding, especially where people might lack the resources to afford independent advocates. So that's everything we covered. Again, if there's anything I've missed, please do feel free to chip in or to put your thoughts into the chat. Just for the last few minutes, we would be grateful if you could go on to our Slido one last time. And there's a final question for us all there, which is around what is your main takeaway from today and how you think we can collaborate with you and the wider sector. So I know that we've already touched upon some of this, but it would be great for us to hear more from you on that. So again, Ferg, would it be possible for you to potentially share your screen just so we see what's coming in? We'll be grateful if folks could go onto the Slido and potentially put in any thoughts there. If you just go into the results, Ferg, obviously feel free to add something yourself so we can do that. Great. Okay, so we've seen something around the need for more bilingual advocates and the benefits of this. Definitely very important for interpretation, for reaching out to diverse communities and helping them in the best way possible. Any other key takeaways from people or ideas on how we can collaborate with you or the wider sector? Absolutely, we'd be very keen to share the report with you as well as the slides. So we'll definitely work on that. Talking to the National Advocacy Leadership Group. The fact that non-statutory advocacy is really valuable to people getting the advocacy, important that the wider society recognizes this more. Definitely, that's exactly what we're hoping to help with and contribute to, hopefully, at least in a small way. There's such a great need for statutory and non-statutory advocacy, and these should run side by side. Funding certainly needs to be put in place to meet the needs of people. Absolutely agreed. Reassurance that we're getting many things right in our service. Experience is resonating. That's really great for us to hear as well, to make sure that we are on the right track and that this resonates with people outside of our immediate programs. Thank you very much for that. The need to include people who access advocacy, absolutely. So including user voice, the voice of people actually accessing these services. Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for that. Another one come in just now around the lack of rural services and effective outreach in those areas. And absolutely, as Ferg mentioned in his presentation, this is something we've heard from the grantees we're working with as well, and that continues to be a challenge for sure. Brilliant. Well, we'll keep an eye on this. The poll is still open, so if you have any further ideas or suggestions, please do keep dropping those in. But for the final part, feel free to stop sharing your screen. Fleur, thank you very much. We just wanted to really thank you for your time today. It's been such a pleasure seeing some familiar faces, but also meeting, for the most part, new people. So thank you very much for joining, for all of your time, for some really enriching discussions. We'll make sure we take these ideas forward and help them and use these to refine our research, as well as our engagement and discussion going forward. So thank you very much for that. And we would also love to keep in touch. So I'm just going to share our contact details on the screen. It includes the website for our organization, Social Finance, where you'll find resources for a lot of other work that we also do. This is just one of the areas that we work on, so there might be other things that are of interest. It also includes email addresses for me and Ferg in case you're interested in finding out more, getting in touch to collaborate, or to ask us any further questions or discuss any of this further. We'd be very, very happy to talk. So thank you very much for everything and for your time, and a huge thank you to Kate for organizing this, and to Gail as well for all her support on this. Pleasure speaking. Hope you have a great day and great weekend. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.
You too, Winifred. Thank you very much.